Rain hammered the narrow streets of the city that night, turning the alley behind Cassian Vance's apartment building into a river of neon and shadow. A man stood at her door, bleeding, his silk shirt torn, his hand locked around his son's wrist like it was the last solid thing in the world. No one had chased them down that alley. Not yet. But the fear on his face said they would. Inside, a mother folded laundry beside her sleeping son, believing the hardest part of her day was already behind her. When she heard the knock, 3 times, unsteady, wrong, something in her chest told her before her mind did. Cassian Vance's apartment smelled like fabric softener and the leftover garlic from dinner. Trevin was asleep on the couch, one sock on, cartoons murmuring low. This was hers, small, warm, hard-won, and locked 3 times over because the world outside had taught her that softness gets punished. If a story like this one pulls you in, a stranger's desperate knock, a mother's instinct, a danger that hasn't shown its full face yet, come be part of that one too. Subscribe, drop a like, and tell us in the comments what you think happens next. We read every single comment, and it means more than you know. The knock came again, 3 times, uneven, desperate, and Cassian's whole body went still before her mind caught up. She pulled the chain slow, careful, the way you do when your gut's already screaming at you to look first and think later. And when she cracked the door open, there he was, a man, tall, soaked straight through an expensive black jacket that probably cost more than her rent, blood, actual blood, blooming dark at his collar, thin lines of it tracking down his neck like the rain hadn't decided whether to wash it away or make it worse. His hair was slicked back, wet, sticking to his forehead, and his eyes... God, his eyes. They had that look people get when they've run out of options and you're the last door on the street. Beside him stood a boy, small, maybe 8, soaked to the bone in a dark hoodie, a heavy backpack sagging off his shoulders like it weighed more than he did. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even scared looking, not the way you'd expect a kid to be at midnight in a storm like this. He just watched her, quiet, still, like he'd already learned that being loud gets you noticed, and being noticed gets you hurt. Please, the man said, his voice cracked on the word. Just for tonight, just him. And here's the thing you need to understand about Cassian Vance. She had spent years building a life where nobody got past that door. Not landlords with sob stories, not exes with excuses. Nobody. She'd locked that door, chained it, bolted it, because the world had taught her, hard, more than once, that opening it for strangers gets you hurt. But something in her chest wasn't listening to any of that right now, because there was a child standing in the rain, and whatever else was going on, whatever this man was running from, that boy hadn't done anything wrong. That boy was just cold and scared and out of places to go. She looked past the man's shoulder, out into the dark street behind him. Empty. No cars, no footsteps. Nothing but rain hammering the asphalt and the orange flicker of a street lamp 2 buildings down. "Who's after you?" she asked, not because she planned to let him in. Not yet. She just needed to know what she'd be inviting into her home if she did. "Nobody who knows where you live," he said. Not yet. Not yet. 2 words. That's all it took to change the whole temperature of the night. She should have shut the door right there. Anybody with sense would have. But she looked down at that little boy again, soaked, silent, gripping his father's hand like it was the only solid thing left in his world. And something old and stubborn in her chest just broke open. "Get in," she said. "Both of you, now, before somebody sees." The apartment went from quiet to chaos in about 90 seconds flat. Cassianne had the first aid kit out before she'd even processed what she was doing. Muscle memory, the kind you build up from years of scraped knees and kitchen accidents. She grabbed towels, a clean shirt of her ex's she still had shoved in the back of a drawer for reasons she never examined too closely, and pointed at her kitchen table like she'd done this 100 times before. "Sit," she told him. Sat. And up close, in the light, she got her first real look at him. And it didn't make things simpler. His shirt was silk, unbuttoned at the collar, and underneath it she caught the edge of tattoos winding up his throat, dark and deliberate, the kind of ink that told a story she didn't want to know the ending of. His hands were shaking, just slightly, but his eyes never stopped moving. Door, window, like a man who hadn't stopped scanning a room in years. "Do-hyun," he said quietly when she asked his name. "Kwon Do-hyun, and this is my son, Ji-seop." She peeled back his collar to look at the wound, a graze, deep but not fatal, the kind that comes from something moving fast and mean past skin. She cleaned it without a word, jaw tight, hands steady even though her heart was doing something complicated in her chest. And he noticed. He noticed the way her fingers moved. Not clinical, not distant, but careful. Like she was handling something she'd already decided, mattered. Nobody had touched him like that in a long time. Not since before his wife. "You've done this before," he said quietly, watching her hands work. "Raising a boy alone teaches you things," she said, not looking up. "Scraped knees, busted lips. Didn't figure it'd ever be a grown man's throat, but here we are." He almost smiled at that. Almost. And for a second, just a second, barely long enough to notice, their eyes met over the gauze, and neither one looked away as fast as they probably should have. That's when a car door slammed somewhere out on the street, and Do-hyun was on his feet before the sound even finished, moving toward the window, putting his own body between Cassianne and whatever was happening outside without even thinking about it. It was just a neighbor coming home late, nothing more. But he stood there anyway, shoulders squared toward the door until he was sure. Cassianne noticed that too, filed it away somewhere she didn't examine too closely. And that's when she noticed the boys. Trevon had woken up somewhere in the commotion. Of course he had. No 7-year-old sleeps through a storm and strangers and his mama moving furniture. And he was standing in the kitchen doorway in his one sock, staring at Ji-seop. Ji-seop stared right back. Neither one said a word. And then, quiet, careful, like they were speaking some language only kids understand, Trevon walked over and just sat down next to him. Didn't ask his name. Didn't ask why he was wet or why his dad was bleeding at the kitchen table. Just sat. And Ji-seop's shoulders, which had been up around his ears since he walked through that door, dropped. Just a little. Like some part of him finally believed, for the first time all night, that he was somewhere safe. Cassianne watched that happen over Do-hyun's shoulder, and something in her throat went tight. She glanced up and caught Do-hyun watching the boys too, watching his son settle for the first time in what was probably days. And something about the raw relief on his face made her look away before he caught her looking at him instead. "They know each other," she said. It wasn't a question. "Same school," Do-hyun said. "Same class." A pause, longer than it needed to be. "My son talks about your son. About a lady who gave him half her lunch once, when he forgot his." Cassianne's hands stopped moving. She remembered that. Weeks ago. She hadn't thought twice about it. Just a kid who looked hungry and embarrassed, and she'd had an extra sandwich, and that was that. "That's why you came here," she said slowly. "Out of every door on every street in this city, you came to my door. Because of a sandwich." Do-hyun looked at her. really looked at her, and for the first time since he'd showed up bleeding on her doorstep, something in his face softened. "My son doesn't feel safe very many places," he said. He felt safe here. And if that didn't just about undo her right there at her own kitchen table, she didn't know what would. She didn't sleep that night. Couldn't, not with a stranger's blood drying on a towel in her bathroom and two little boys curled up together on Trevon's bed like they'd known each other their whole lives instead of just a few hours. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, she made coffee, because if she was going to get answers, she needed to be wide awake for them. "Talk," she said, sliding a mug across the table. "All of it. I let you into my house. I at least deserve to know what I let in with you." So he told her. Told her about a business. That's the word he used. Business. Careful and clipped, like he was choosing every syllable. That had taken him half his life to build. Told her about a man named Beijin Huan, someone he'd trusted, someone he'd called a brother, who decided that half his life's work wasn't enough anymore. Wanted all of it, and was willing to burn down everything, everyone, standing in the way of taking it. "They came for me tonight," Do-hyun said, "at my home. I got Ji-seop out through the kitchen. That's all I had time for. Getting him out." "And where's his mother?" Cassian asked. Careful. Gentle, even, in a way she didn't expect from herself. Something flickered across his face. Old grief, the kind that doesn't heal, just scars over. "Not here to protect him anymore," he said. "So it's only me. And right now, me isn't enough." Cassian sat with that for a second. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle, tapping the window like it was trying to get in on the conversation. "So what exactly did you bring to my door?" she asked. "Because it sounds to me like you brought a war. I brought my son to the only place I believed might be too small, too far outside my world for them to think of looking," he said. "I'm asking you to keep him small and invisible a little while longer, that's all." She almost believed that a little while longer would be simple. She should have known better. It was Cassian who saw it first. 3 days later, standing at her window with a cup of coffee, watching the block wake up the way it always did. Except it wasn't waking up the way it always did. There was a car parked across the street. Black. Expensive. The kind of car that didn't belong on a block where half the cars on the curb had more rust than paint. It hadn't moved in 2 hours, and there was a man inside it who wasn't doing anything, not reading a paper, not talking on his phone, not eating breakfast from the corner spot like everybody else who parked here for a minute. Just sitting, watching. She'd lived on this block for 9 years. She knew every car that belonged and every car that didn't, the same way you know the sound of your own front door versus somebody else's. And this one didn't belong. "Do-hyun," she called, keeping her voice low, even though the boys were in the next room and probably couldn't hear a thing over cartoons. "Come here!" He was at the window in 2 steps, and the second he saw the car, his whole body changed, went rigid, alert, like a switch had flipped somewhere behind his eyes. "How long has it been there?" he asked. "I don't know, I just noticed it." "That's not local," he said, voice low and tight. "That's not police. That's not anybody who belongs on the street." And that's when a second car turned the corner. Slow. Deliberate. Circling the block like a shark that hadn't decided yet whether it was hungry. Cassian felt something cold settle low in her stomach, the kind of cold that has nothing to do with weather. "They found you," she said. "Not yet," he said, but his voice had lost the certainty it had the first night. "But they're looking in the right neighborhood, and that means we don't have much time before looking becomes finding." He turned to her then, and his voice dropped into something quieter, harder. the voice of a man drawing a line and meaning to hold it. "Cassie, listen to me. Whatever comes to this door looking for me, if they want to get to you or to those boys, they go through me first. That's not a promise. That's just how it's going to be." She didn't answer right away. Didn't know what to say to a man who'd known her 4 days and already meant it that much. So she just nodded once and let that sit between them. That's when GCOP's backpack came up. It was such a small thing, such a stupid, ordinary thing. A kid's backpack, heavy canvas, scuffed at the corners, the kind every single kid at that school carried to class, every single day. Except Do-hyun was staring at it now like it was a live wire. "Where did this come from?" he asked. Quiet, too quiet. "It's his school bag," Cassian said. "He's had it." "Who bought it?" Something in his tone made her stop cold. "I don't know. Ask him." Do-hyun crouched in front of his son, and his voice went soft in a way she hadn't heard from him yet. The voice of a father trying not to scare his kid while asking a question that terrified him. "GCOP, who gave you this bag?" The boy blinked. "Uncle Kwang-sun, before school started." And Cassian watched a grown man's face go the color of ash. He grabbed the bag, tore into the lining at the bottom seam with hands that were shaking now for a completely different reason than the blood loss 3 nights ago. And there, sewn in, small, almost invisible unless you knew exactly what you were looking for, was a tiny black device, no bigger than a coin. Nobody said anything for a second. The room went so quiet you could hear the rain still tapping soft against the window. "What is that?" Cassian finally said. Not really a question. More like she already knew and needed him to say it out loud anyway. "A tracker," Do-hyun said. His voice had gone somewhere far away. "GPS military grade." "How long has it been in there?" "Since before school started." He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his face that looked less like danger and more like devastation. "Kwang-sun's been my second in command for 11 years. I trusted him with my son's life. Literally, I trusted him to keep him safe. And instead, he sold you out." "Worse," Do-hyun said quietly. "He's been tracking my son this whole time, which means every single place we've stayed since that first night, every hiding place I thought was safe." "They already knew," Cassian finished. The silence after that was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Later that night, after the boys were finally asleep, the 2 of them sat on the fire escape because neither one of them could stand being inside 4 walls a second longer. And the conversation that followed wasn't about the syndicate at all. "I used to think being a single parent meant being twice as strong," Cassian said, looking out at the wet street below. "Turns out it just means being twice as scared, all the time, about everything, and having nobody to hand that fear to for even 5 minutes." "I know that fear," Do-hyun said. "I built an empire so my son would never want for anything, and the one thing I couldn't buy him was somebody safe to hand him to when I wasn't enough." He paused. "You asked me once why I came to your door out of every door in this city. That's why. Not just at the sandwich. It's because for the first time in years I looked at someone and thought, she wouldn't drop him, even if it cost her everything. That's a lot to put on a stranger," Cassian said quietly. "You stopped being a stranger 3 days ago," he said. "I don't know exactly when, but you did." She looked over at him then, this man who'd walked into her life bleeding and dangerous and completely upended everything she thought she'd built her life to avoid. "I stopped trusting people a long time ago," she admitted. "Not because I wanted to, because it kept getting me hurt, and I had a son depending on me to not fall apart. So I just closed the door on everybody. And now? Now I've got a Korean Mafia boss on my fire escape at midnight telling me I'm not a stranger anymore." she said, and something in her voice cracked into something close to a laugh. So I guess the door's open a little wider than I planned. Home, Do-yeon said quietly, almost to himself. I keep trying to remember what that word felt like before all this. I think it might feel like this, right here. Neither of them said anything else for a while. They just sat there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the rain finally start to let up over the block, and something unspoken settled between them that neither one was ready to name yet. That's when she picked up her phone. "What are you doing?" he asked, watching her scroll through contacts like the whole world outside hadn't just turned into a threat. "What I should have done 3 days ago," she said. "I'm calling people who actually know this block better than any car full of strangers ever will." Because here's the thing he didn't understand yet, and she was about to teach him. You don't fight a war like this with money or muscle or fancy tactics alone. Not on her street. You fight it with aunties who sit on porches all day and notice everything. With teenagers who ride bikes up and down the block and clock every unfamiliar face before it even finishes parking. With a corner store owner who's been on that corner for 20 years and knows every regular customer by name and every stranger by instinct. Within the hour, she had 4 different neighbors quietly watching 4 different points around the block, phones in hand, told simply to text her the second anything looked wrong. No explanations needed beyond, "Somebody's watching my place and I need eyes I trust." That's all it took. That's what 9 years of showing up for people gets you. Do-hyun watched all of it happen with something like disbelief on his face. "You built a surveillance network," he said slowly, "in under an hour, with no money, no equipment." "I built a neighborhood," Cassian corrected him. "Something you can't buy no matter how much of that fancy suit money you've got." And for the first time since he'd shown up bleeding on her doorstep, Do-yeon looked at her like he was finally starting to understand exactly who he'd knocked on the door of that night. "Your instincts," he said, "and my training, if we combine them, we might actually keep these boys alive," she finished. Outside, the black car was still sitting there, watching, waiting. But for the first time in 3 days, Cassian didn't feel like the one being hunted. She felt like the trap was starting to close the other way. And whatever was coming next, whatever that syndicate was planning to throw at her front door, she had a feeling it was about to run straight into something it never accounted for. Because you don't just come after a mother's home. You come after her home. You'd better be ready for everything that comes with her. Do-hyun almost missed it. It came through a burner line, one of maybe 6 numbers left in the world that still trusted him with a working signal. A garbled string of code disguised as a shipment update. Anybody else glancing at it would have scrolled right past, but he wasn't anybody else. He decrypted it standing in Cassian's cramped hallway at 3 in the morning, phone screen throwing pale light across his face, and by the time he finished reading, something in him just went still. Cassian found him like that a few minutes later, frozen, phone still in his hand, staring at nothing. "What?" she said. Not a question, a demand. "Kwang-sun," he said. His voice came out flat, hollow, like all the air had been pulled out of it. "It's him. It was always him." She sat down across from him at the kitchen table, the same table she'd stitched him up on 4 nights ago, and waited because she'd learned by now that some things you don't rush a man into saying. "He didn't just plant a tracker," Do-hyun said finally. "He planned the whole thing, the coup, the ambush at my house, all of it, his idea from the start. He convinced Jin Hwan he could deliver me on a plate, convinced him it'd be easy." A bitter laugh escaped him, sharp and humorless. 11 years. I made that man rich. I made him family. And this whole time, he's been drawing a map straight to my son. Cassian didn't say anything right away. She just reached across the table and put her hand over his, the same hand that had been shaking that first night, steadier now, but still carrying all that weight. "You know what the hardest part of betrayal is?" she said quietly. "It's never the stranger who gets you. It's always somebody who had a key to the door." He looked up at her, and for a second the Mafia boss disappeared completely. What was left was just a father, exhausted, grieving something he hadn't even had the chance to name yet. "I don't know how to fight someone who knows every move I'm going to make before I make it," he admitted. "Then you stop making the moves he expects," Cassian said simply. "That's not a Mafia strategy, that's just common sense. Something my grandmother taught me a long time ago. If somebody knows your patterns, baby, you change the pattern." And for the first time all night, Do-hyun almost smiled. But you know what? Before all of that, before the traitor, before the siege that was coming, before everything that was about to explode across that block, there was one evening. Just one. And I need you to hold on to this one because it's about to matter more than you think. It was a Thursday, ordinary in every way that counted, which by now felt like the rarest thing in the world. Cassian cooked. Real cooking, the kind that takes hours and fills up a whole apartment with smell before it ever hits a plate. Smothered chicken, greens, cornbread straight out of the cast iron. And Do-hyun, watching her move around that kitchen like she owned the whole world in it, quietly disappeared for 20 minutes and came back with bags from the Korean market 3 blocks over, insisted on making japchae, said it was Ji Seop's favorite, said a boy shouldn't go this long without a single thing that tasted like home. They ended up with both. A table absolutely covered. Cornbread next to japchae, greens next to kimchi do-yeon had somehow found time to pick up too. And the 4 of them crowded around it like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. Trevon and Ji Seop were laughing about something, some inside joke only 7- and 8-year-olds understand. Something about a cartoon character and a fart sound effect. The kind of joke that means absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. And watching them, Cassian felt something crack open in her chest that she hadn't let herself feel in a long, long time. "They're brothers now," she said quietly, almost to herself. "However this ends, they're going to remember each other as brothers." Do-hyun looked at the boys, then back at her. "I haven't seen Ji Seop laugh like that," he said, "since before his mother passed." He paused. "I forgot what it sounded like. I forgot I was allowed to miss hearing it." Cassian understood something in that moment she hadn't let herself say out loud yet, somewhere in the middle of bandaging wounds and building lookout networks and stitching 2 terrified families into one. Something else had crept in without asking permission. Not romance, not yet, nothing so simple. Just recognition. 2 people who'd both built walls out of necessity, sitting at the same table, watching those walls come down brick by brick because 2 little boys refused to let them stay up. "I haven't let anyone into my life like this in years," she admitted. "Not since a lot of reasons. I stopped trusting people to stick around when things got hard." "I know that feeling," Do-hyun said. "In my world, everyone who gets close eventually wants something, or betrays you for something bigger." A pause. "You haven't asked me for anything. Not once." "I don't want anything from you, Do-yeon," she said simply. "I just didn't have it in me to shut a door on a scared kid. Everything after that, it just happened." Outside, the evening was quiet. No black cars, no watching eyes, just an ordinary Thursday. Warm kitchen light spilling out into an ordinary night. Neither one of them knew it yet, but that was the last quiet evening they were going to get. The power went out at 11:47 p.m. Not a flicker, not a brownout, all at once. The whole building, every hallway light, every apartment window on the block gone dark in the same instant, like someone had reached out and simply switched off the entire world. Cassianne was awake before her eyes even opened. Some instinct, some animal thing buried deep in a mother's chest, had her sitting upright in the pitch black before her brain caught up with why. Do-hyun was already moving. She heard him in the hallway, footsteps fast and silent, and when he appeared in her doorway, what little moonlight came through the window showed her a face she hadn't seen on him before. Not fear, exactly. Something colder, something that had clearly done this before. "They cut the grid," he said, voice low. "That's not an accident. That's a signal." "A signal for what?" "For the team that's already moving into position." Cassian's blood went to ice. "How long do we have?" "Minutes," he said. "Get the boys. Now." She didn't ask a second question. She was already moving. Already in Trevin's room. Already scooping up two half-asleep boys who didn't understand yet why they were being pulled out of bed in the dark, why their mothers' and fathers' voices had gone tight and fast and serious. "Cassie?" Do-hyun caught her arm in the hallway, and even in the dark she could feel how still he'd gone. "Whatever happens in the next few minutes, whatever you hear, you do not open that door. Not for anyone. Not even if you hear my voice on the other side telling you to. You understand me? Not until I say the word we agreed on." "Do-hyun!" "Promise me." And God help her, she promised. Because somewhere below them, faint but unmistakable in that dead, silent dark, she heard the front door of the building give way. They came up the stairwell like professionals, quiet, coordinated. No wasted movement, no wasted sound, which honestly made it worse, somehow, than if they'd come screaming and shouting. This was methodical. This was a team that had done this exact thing more times than Cassianne wanted to imagine. Do-hyun met them at the second-floor landing. What happened next, Cassianne only heard, muffled through walls and a locked apartment door. The boys pressed tight against her on the living room floor, both of them trembling but silent, because even at 7 and 8 years old, some part of them understood that silence was survival tonight. She heard grunts, impacts, the specific sickening sound of a body hitting a wall hard enough to crack drywall. She heard Do-hyun's voice, low, controlled, nothing like the desperate, bleeding man who'd shown up at her door 4 nights ago, issuing something that sounded less like begging and more like command. And through it all, she kept her arms around those 2 boys and her back against the wall, and she thought about every single thing her grandmother ever taught her about protecting what's yours. Then she heard the window, not the front door, not where Do-hyun was fighting. The bathroom window, small, easy to miss, exactly the kind of entry point a smart enforcer chooses when the front is guarded. Cassianne didn't scream, didn't freeze. She grabbed the heaviest thing within reach, a cast-iron skillet, still faintly warm from dinner hours ago, and positioned herself between that bathroom doorway and the 2 children behind her. The man who came through that window was big, bigger than Do-hyun, built like someone who'd made a career out of being the largest thing in any room he walked into. He saw her, a full-figured black woman in a nightshirt holding a frying pan like it was a weapon, and something in his face actually flickered with amusement. That was his first mistake. She didn't wait for him to finish crossing the room. She swung that skillet with everything 9 years of carrying groceries up 4 flights of stairs and hauling a growing boy around had built into her arms, and it connected with his jaw hard enough to spin him sideways into the wall. He came back at her fast, furious now, and what followed wasn't graceful. It wasn't some choreographed fight scene. It was raw and ugly and desperate. 2 bodies crashing into furniture, a lamp shattering, Trevon and Jiseop screaming from the corner where she'd shoved them behind the couch. She fought like a mother fights, with everything, with no plan, with pure refusal wired into every muscle. Because there was absolutely no version of tonight where this man got past her to those children. She got her hand on a heavy ceramic vase off the side table and cracked it across the back of his skull just as he had her pinned against the wall, fingers closing around her throat, and he dropped like a felled tree. She was still standing over him, chest heaving, hands shaking, when Do-yeon burst through the front door, bloodied, favoring one arm, but alive, and his eyes went wide, taking in the scene. The shattered lamp, the unconscious man on her living room floor, Cassian standing over him like something out of a story people wouldn't believe if she told it. "You held the line," he said, breathless, disbelieving. "Damn right I did," she said, voice shaking but fierce. "Nobody touches my children." My children, both of them. She hadn't even noticed she'd said it that way until the words were already out. Outside, sirens were finally cutting through the night. The neighborhood network she'd built in an hour, doing exactly what she'd asked of it, calling in every favor and every set of eyes she trusted the second things went wrong. Below, in the stairwell, 2 more enforcers lay stopped cold, and the sound of retreating footsteps out in the rain told her the rest of the team had realized this hit had gone very, very wrong. They'd survived it. It was maybe 20 minutes later, once the ambulances and the hushed neighborhood questions had quieted down and the adrenaline had finally started draining out of everyone's bones, that Ji-seop tugged on his father's sleeve. He was still shaking, still pale, still holding onto Trayvon's hand like he wasn't ready to let go of it yet. "Dad," he said, voice small, "can we stay here forever?" Do-yeon froze completely. Whatever he'd been about to say died in his throat. "It feels like home here," Ji-seop said, quieter now, like he was almost afraid to admit it out loud. "More than anywhere we've ever lived." Do-yeon crouched down in front of his son, right there in the middle of a living room, still wrecked from a fight for their lives, and for a moment, he couldn't speak at all. When he finally did, his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "I don't know yet," he said honestly, "but I promise you this. Wherever we end up, it's going to feel like this. I'll make sure of it." Cassian, standing a few feet away with Trevon's hand still in hers, had to look away for a second and blink hard against something stinging behind her eyes. Because that little boy had just said, out loud, the thing none of the grown-ups in that room had let themselves say yet. It wasn't over. Not yet. Because somewhere out there, Bai Jinhwan and Seo Kwang-soon were about to learn that the ambush had failed. And men like that don't take failure well. It took 11 days to finish what that night started. Do-hyun, working with contacts he still trusted, the few who hadn't been touched by Kwang-soon's betrayal, fed false information back through the same channel the traitor had used to track them, told him a location, told him a time. And when Kwang-soon's remaining loyalists showed up ready to finish the job, they found themselves walking straight into a trap of their own making, surrounded by the very authorities Do-hyun had spent years avoiding. Authorities he now handed everything to, every account, every shipment record, every ounce of evidence he'd built over a decade in that world, because he'd finally understood something Cassian had been trying to tell him since that first bleeding night at her door. You can't outfight an entire syndicate forever, but you can burn it down from the inside once and for all if you're willing to lose everything you built to save the one thing that actually matters. Jinhwan was arrested trying to cross a border with 3 passports and a bag full of cash. Kwang-soon didn't make it that far. His own loyalists, realizing the ship was sinking, made sure of that themselves before authorities ever reached him. And just like that, it was over. Do-han spent the next several months doing something he never imagined himself doing, sitting across from lawyers instead of lieutenants, restructuring what remained of his business into something legal, something clean, something a son could inherit without inheriting the danger that came with it too. He testified. He cooperated. He gave up more power in 6 months than most men give up in a lifetime, and every single time someone asked him if it was worth it, he had the same answer. "Watch my son fall asleep without checking the door locks 3 times first," he'd say. "Then ask me again if it was worth it." Cassian's apartment never really went back to just being Cassian's apartment. It became something else, something bigger than 4 walls and a chain lock. It became the place where 2 boys who started as classmates became something closer to brothers, where a Black American mother and a Korean father who'd once seemed like they came from 2 completely different worlds discovered that love, real, protective, unconditional love, didn't actually care what world you came from. There were Sunday dinners now, permanent ones, cornbread next to japchae like it had always belonged there. There was a small shrine of a life rebuilt from scratch, a woman who'd spent years keeping her door locked to the world, learning that some doors, once you let the right people through, are worth leaving open. It was on one of those Sundays, months later, that Do-hyun showed up at her door again. Only this time, everything was different. No rain, no blood, no shaking hands or wide, hunted eyes. Just an ordinary evening, warm light spilling out from her kitchen window, and Do-hyun standing there, clean, healthy, smiling in a way she'd never once seen on him that first terrifying night. He'd knocked 3 times, but steady this time, sure of itself. Cassian opened the door and just looked at him for a second, something warm rising in her chest at the sight of him standing there with nothing to run from anymore. "The first time I knocked on this door," he said quietly, "I asked if my son could stay." She waited, heart doing something complicated and hopeful in her chest. "Today," he said, "I'm wondering if we both can." Cassian didn't say a word. She just opened the door wider, wide enough for all of it, wide enough for whatever came next, and let him step through. If this story pulled you all the way to the end, if you found yourself holding your breath through that stairwell fight or blinking back something behind your eyes when that little boy asked if they could stay forever, that's exactly the kind of story we love telling on Ella's Diaries. So if you're not subscribed yet, come join us there. Drop a like if this one hit you the way it hit us writing it, and tell us in the comments what part stayed with you most. We read every single word you leave, and we're grateful, genuinely, for every one of you who shows up for these stories.